Well, some of the challenges involved in sort of direct action situations that are different than being in a community situation where you have a lot of time, you might have a lot of experience working with each other. In the direct action campaigns that we were working on, oftentimes you'd be working with people, or all the time, you'd be working with people, some of whom you've never met before, some of whom were probably cops, and there were challenges around making decisions that made people feel respected and good, but also making them in a time frame that allowed you to get work done in the framework that you had, which was usually finite. If we had a convergence where we might have 7 days to plan an action, it didn't work for us to not have decisions. We had to be making decisions. And with consensus process, you know, if you get to a place where people are blocking on a consistent basis, it doesn't allow you to progress forward. So I think there are moments like that. That being said, there are moments where everybody has to agree. Been in situations in street demonstrations which have an interesting other side to them, which is, for the most part, they're symbolic in nature. They're, you know, real people's bodies in the street in harm's way, but they are symbolic. A lot of people aren't looking at losing their jobs or their homes or, you know, their families in the way that people are in struggles in other realms. When I'm talking about direct action struggles, most of what we're doing is symbolic in nature. It also it can have real impact, but the stakes aren't often as high. But that being said, in those moments when people are facing going to jail or being in dangerous situations, we have had really successful spokes council meetings, and we've had them over walkie-talkies with spokespeople at from each street, conducting spokes council meetings with spokes of affinity groups in each street, deciding an exit strategy. And one particular example, at April 16th, 2000 in DC, we had a situation where we felt like the police were going to come, were going to attack a particular part of the black bloc. And so we had a spokes council meeting on the street. We were all in different streets holding different intersections. And what we wanted to negotiate was a snake march to pick up each street and to get everyone out of that situation safely, because people didn't want to be arrested. It wasn't the point. And so there were in the street spokes council meetings in each street with affinity groups meeting in a circle, and we had one person from each meeting as a spoke reporting back through the communication system and negotiating how this would work, and we all came to consensus. It was kind of amazing. And for a lot of people, that is the point of why we were there, not just to sort of block a meeting, but to really create for ourselves an experience of radical democracy in the face of radical domination. And that was what was important to people. That's what felt really good when we got out of that situation. Not the fact that we got out, but the fact of how we got out and how we did it collectively and through this process. So that was very powerful. Another situation for me, which was even more powerful, was in front of the jails in Seattle. There were a lot of people already arrested after the World Trade Organization protests. There was a lot of reports of brutality inside the jails, and in front of the jails was an increasingly large presence in downtown Seattle, and a large presence of people that hadn't been involved in organizing the action, of just people from Seattle who were concerned and who were bringing food and were outraged at their city. And one particular evening, the evening that the World Trade Organization ended up that ministerial collapsing, we had an impromptu spokes council with no sound equipment, and I don't know how many, it felt like thousands of people, with a call and response style facilitator. We had this man, Skip Spencer, who's from Santa Cruz, stand on I think it was a large rock, and call out pieces of sentences, and the crowd would yell them beyond so that everyone could hear. And we taught the crowd to break up into affinity groups and spokes councils, and we had each group talk about what contingencies felt good to them in terms of both strategies around getting prisoners out, and also there were a few lockdowns still happening, and those groups wanted to know, there were groups blocking delegates still at their hotels, and they wanted to know what the larger movement wanted them to do. And in order to ascertain that, we really needed to talk. We didn't want to just have, 10 of us who actually had walkie-talkies and were, organizers in that moment decide what was the right thing to do, because that wasn't the point of what we were doing. The point was having this experience of democracy, which is where this whole "this is what democracy looks like" chant came from. And so we broke into groups and took people through a consensus process in the streets, or in this courtyard in the middle of the jail facility, and had people come to consensus around a strategy which involved sending some people to each of these hotels, negotiating with the police and bringing the groups back, and also sending delegates into the jails and keeping the pressure on there. And it was incredibly powerful. And after we made this decision, a lot of the crowd busted out into wild dancing and chanting, "This is what democracy looks like," and just people really feeling both the power of what we were doing in terms of, for ourselves, participating in this experiment in democracy, and knowing that the World Trade Organization was collapsing due to its lack of democracy, and knowing that there was a really strong linkage, and we were sort of holding down two ends of a continuum in a very powerful and poetic way. And I think that for anyone who is involved in the anti-globalization movement, while there were certainly power dynamics and things that were far from perfect in the anti-globalization movement, the thing that I think probably rings most powerful to people was that experience of experimenting with radical democracy.